Welcome to the podcast, Kelly. Thank you so much for coming and talking with me today. I'm very excited for this conversation. We've got a few topics of like meditation and yoga nidra and some business thrown in there. So it's going to be lots of fun.
I am excited. Those are 3 of my favorite things.
Yay, same. And I just wanted to start by asking you, what drew you into specializing more in meditation rather than other aspects of a yoga practice?
I really started in the physical. I started teaching yoga and, like, my favorite, I think because I was an athlete, was, like, the power yoga, the hot yoga sculpt. Like, if I could put, like, weights and yoga all together, like, that's what I felt the most comfortable with at first. But once I started dabbling in kind of the other side of things, I remember when years ago, like 10 years ago, I had moved to this like one bar, one Walmart town of the US for my husband's like medical school. And the short of the story is I ended up opening a yoga studio there. And my students that were there were, I wouldn't say they were super curious about meditation per se, but they also weren't there for like, let's throw some weights around. Let's do like this super powerful, intense practice. And something that I felt that I know a lot of other people feel too is I felt like my 200-hour teacher training taught me what meditation was, but it didn't really teach me like how to teach it. And so I wanted to be able to share that, but I don't feel like I can teach anything I don't know myself. So I really started to explore meditation, and I ended up doing things like staying with monks for a couple of weeks and learning about like TWIM or loving kindness meditation, like taking a vow of silence, reading a lot of books, like YouTube videos, doing all of these deep dives for years and just pulling information. I'm also neurodivergent with ADHD, so I love a hyperfixation. I love taking deep dives and like gathering all of this different information and then kind of taking little bits from it and then packaging it together and creating like a little practice. And so I started doing that at the end of my classes at my studio, and it kind of became my little signature thing. And honestly, I think the thing that continued to like perpetuate it, it began with my own interest and being like, I want to know more about this so I can better serve my students. But then a lot of it was the feedback I was getting from my students is that it really opened my eyes to the fact that I felt like there were a lot of teachers out there that were serving the physical and were, really focusing on like the asana and the sequencing, and all of that is great and so important. But at the time, especially even 10 years ago, I didn't feel like there were a lot of options for my students, for people who wanted to explore meditation and mindfulness. And I ended up doing in this journey an additional 300-hour training, which is where I was introduced to Yoga Nidra. I didn't feel like there were a lot of teachers out there that were sharing those practices in a way that felt attainable. Like someone just, a regular like Missouri wine mom who would come to yoga class, but then also kind of curious about meditation. Like she wasn't going to go live with the monks and take a vow of silence. Like that's not accessible to her. That's not what she wanted. But she was looking for someone who would be able to help her with her anxiety, or she wanted to sleep better. She's really stressed about her kids. And I just kind of saw this gap that I felt like people weren't filling. And I was like, well, I have a passion for this. So I'll start to fill that gap. And maybe that's not like a very sexy answer as to what really pulled me to it, but I loved it so much. And then people were really curious about it. And I knew they were looking for kind of a teaching style that maybe felt a little bit more down to earth. And so I was like, well, I can do that. I love doing that. And so I just started doing it. And the feedback that I've continued to get, whether it be from people listening to the podcast, Mindful Minutes is my podcast, or people who come on retreats or things like that, is that they really do feel like you can get like someone who can create a good yoga sequence, but what people are really craving is something a little bit deeper at times. And so, I don't know, I just stuck with it.
I love that. So you also had people coming to you for the meditation as well, which is nice because I also wanted to ask, what do you tell someone that says, I can't meditate, I can't stop thinking, I just get distracted? Because I hear that so much when I talk about anything meditation with like friends or anyone.
Believe me, I hear this too. And my way of dealing with a lot of stuff is kind of through humor, but a lot of the times I'll be like, look, just because I'm a meditation teacher, like I'm not going to force you to meditate, but I'll kind of like crack a joke and be like, it's okay if you don't want to meditate. Because I think for some people, I do have another answer too, because I think when people tell me that, I suspect it's usually one of two things. Either people just don't care for meditation and it's just not their thing. They don't care to try it. They just don't really know what to say when they're like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" I'm like, "I'm a meditation teacher." I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, what do I say to that?" And so if that's not their thing, there's definitely a space to be like, if this isn't your thing, it's not your thing, right? For some people, it's like yoga is just not their thing and that's okay. And I do think that's one kind of like avenue when people answer in that way or say that. But I also think sometimes the bigger thing is a lot of times people will tell me, I tried meditation once, but, or, oh, I've always wanted to meditate, but, and I'm always interested in what follows because, Adrian, you hit the nail on the head where it's like, but I'm too busy, or I have ADHD. I can't sit still. I can't sit crisscross applesauce. I can't just turn my mind off all of these things. And I love hearing this because I like to debunk these myths as to what meditation is and isn't. And so then a lot of times my joke is I'll be like, well, saying your brain's too busy to meditate is being like, I'm too dirty to take a shower. It's like, what is this thing that's going to be the remedy to what you're struggling with? But I find that what people are actually getting at is usually a little bit of a deeper issue, which is they don't know how, which is a big thing. And it's probably because no one showed that. Like, of course they don't. I wasn't born on, June 11th in the 90s and be like, I know how to meditate. Like, these are things that we have to learn how to do. And so I think either they have a misconception as to what meditation is or isn't. They don't know how and they aren't sure where to start. I think that's the biggest piece. Is people are like, "Well, I don't know how to do it and I don't even know where to begin," so they don't. And I think that's their way of kind of like opening up the conversation. So usually when people say that, I'll be like, "Oh, that's so interesting. Tell me more." And then I kind of see like what follows and there's usually something after that. And if it's like if the thing that follows is like, "Well, I don't know, I just don't think I really like meditation." I'm like, "That's cool, like, my husband's really into football, and I don't really like that." Like, we all have our things. But then if they're like, "Well, I tried it one time and, like, the person's voice didn't resonate with me," or "I tried it once and it was 30 minutes long and I was like, I can't do this," or "I tried it one time and it felt really spiritual to me and I'm not looking for spiritual, like I just wanted to help fall asleep." And so a lot of times when people say that, I'll be like, "That's so interesting. Tell me more." And then the actual thing underneath it gives you so much more information and really opens up the door for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because a lot of times I've had that conversation as well. It's the, "Oh, but I tried it one time and I couldn't keep my mind quiet." So, I guess that's it then, but it would be good to dive a little bit deeper and see what didn't resonate.
Yeah, and to humanize it too, because I'll also be like, "Oh, yeah, me too, same." Like, I still do this stuff where they'll be like, "I don't have 30 minutes a day," and I'll be like, "Listen, I don't meditate for 30 minutes a day either." Like, I'm the primary parent to 2 little kids. These things happen, and I think kinda just, like, destigmatizing a little bit, like, showing the human behind it. We just have such an image that meditation is like we go to, like, some cave or like the edge of a mountaintop and sit crisscross applesauce and close our eyes and chant om like perfectly with no thoughts for like an hour. And it can be that, but it's most often not that. It's like mental training. I always describe it as like if your mind's a light bulb, meditation is just taking that light bulb and turning it into a laser pointer and pointing that laser at one thing. And then every time you deviate, every time that laser, you're like, oh, there's something going on. You just keep returning it again and again and again. And it gets easier over time, as everything does.
It's a practice, like anything's a practice. What common misconceptions do you see come up within the yoga teacher community around meditation?
That their students won't like it, that they won't know what to say, that you can only do meditation if it's like a meditation class, that there's no way you could weave it into like a yoga sculpt or a power class, that their students will think it's weird. And I find that when you kinda, like, sprinkle it in, and this is something that, like, I have, like, a little workshop on it, but I'll just the TLDR of it is basically you can take these little moments in your yoga classes and, like, sprinkle in meditation. So, there were times, like, when I was first starting where my students were kinda looking for it, but there was also that was maybe, like, 5% of my students, and then the other 95%, they didn't know that's what they were looking for, right? They would just tell me they're having a hard time sleeping, or they would tell me like, "Oh, I just cannot. I'm in this like thought loop and I can like not get out of it," or like, "I'm just so worried about my kids. They just went off to college and I'm worried about that," whatever it is, or like, "I just my anxiety is controlling my life." And so you can take these little moments, whether it be if you're taking a moment of pause in your class, right? Even if you teach a faster paced style, and let's say you give them those moments, you say, "Okay, let's go to a child's pose," or, we'll take a rag doll or something like that. Maybe you're doing a longer hold of some sort. That's your opportunity to give them like a 1 minute little guided meditation. Or I'm a firm believer every Shavasana should be at least 5 minutes, like a true 5 minutes, not like we're going to take 2 minutes to get into it and then 2 minutes to get out of it. And we're laying there and, quiet for like 1 minute. I really believe that we all collectively could maybe extend our Shavasanas just a little bit more, even though I know those classes are tight. But like that's a great opportunity to a little 3 minute practice, or the first few minutes of your class. You bring everyone in, you start in a seated position, and you do, in essence, like pranayama, or like a pranayama meditation practice for a few minutes. You just gave them meditation, you just taught them just this little bit of meditation, and you seamlessly, wove it into your class. And often I find that the feedback that I get and that my students, like who do meditation teacher training, yoga nidra teacher training, they find that they really start to stand out as a teacher because they're adding one of those extra limbs of yoga into their class, and they're kind of giving their students a more like well-rounded practice, and they end up getting really really great feedback, and their class sizes end up growing because people come back kind of for that like little signature of weaving a little bit more into it. But definitely you have to kind of get over that fear and that hump of like, what if they don't like it? um, I don't find that that's really the case, especially if you don't change much in your class. You just find these little moments to just sprinkle it in. And then if you teach something like restorative or yin or even slow flow, that's even easier because every time you're in a long hold in restorative or yin, you're there for 3 to 8 minutes. Give them a little mini meditation every time. Or if you're doing slow flow, you're probably doing a longer meditation or kind of warm up anyways. Like weave them in there. And I find that's really the best way to start introducing your students to meditation. And that's what I did. I started with guided meditations in Shavasana. And then people were like, "Oh my gosh, that class was great. My favorite part was at the end when we did this visualization about this and that." And they may not have even known that it was necessarily meditation. They just know that it felt so good. And it kind of touched on that piece that was like their body felt good because we just moved it in such a supportive, nourishing way. And, like, mentally and emotionally, they felt better too because of that extra piece.
I wanted
Mm.
to talk a little bit about Yoga Nidra. So I have just done your 25-hour Yoga Nidra training and I absolutely loved it. It was fascinating and just very interesting. It's a little bit different to meditation, whereas meditation, like you said, it's like bringing yourself back to this like one focal point. And Yoga Nidra is a little bit opposite to that. And I've realized a lot of Yoga Nidra out there is not really quite a full Yoga Nidra practice. A lot of it's body scan and it says it's Yoga Nidra. And that's what I kind of thought Yoga Nidra was. It's a good chunk of it, but it's only like a little piece of it. So for anyone that's maybe doesn't understand Yoga Nidra and what it is, what it isn't, how does it differ from meditation?
So yoga nidra is such a magical practice. Meditation is too, but I think of them as like cousins and not twins, right? Isn't the joke always that like your eyebrows should be like sisters and not twins or something? Have you heard this? So I think about
Yes,
that.
that something sounds familiar.
I think about that with like yoga nidra and meditation, like they're related, but they are not the same. And for my yoga teachers listening, when you think of meditation, right, it's its own limb. You think about, the eight-limbed path, right? Yama, niyama, pratyahara, asana, pramana, you know these, right? So we have meditation on there, but we also have pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses. And yoga nidra is one of the purest forms of withdrawal of the senses that we have of pratyahara. And while meditation is very much a single pointed concentration, taking that light bulb, turning it into a laser, pointing that laser to one thing. Yoga Nidra is a guided journey through the koshas, the different layers of our being, right? Our physical body, our energetic body, mental body, emotional body, wisdom body, bliss body. And once you go through the different koshas, you come face to face with the true self or Atman. So, on a more spiritual level, we're practicing this deep pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, turning inward, journeying inward through all of our different layers to meet our true self, where we plant a positive seed of intention or sankalpa. On a physical level, where they're a little bit different, right? So, think about meditation as single pointed concentration on a thing with like a singular focus, where yoga nidra is really about journeying inward, connecting with the true self, working through some of those different layers, clearing out some of the gunk. On a physical level, meditation is all about, again, that single pointed concentration, where yoga nidra is the practice of putting the physical body to sleep while keeping the mind awake. So, again, if our mind's a light bulb, when we're meditating, the light bulb turns to a laser and points at one thing. When we're practicing yoga nidra, we put the body to sleep so the light bulb can turn on and like turn up all the way and be like super bright and really open to what we're doing. And so they're working with different limbs. They're different practices. Physically, they also feel different too. So when you're meditating, you do, of course, people fall asleep when they meditate. It happens to the best of us. But most of the time when you're meditating, you're really focused on like this one thing. You're not necessarily falling asleep. Where when you're practicing yoga nidra physically, it feels like that sensation where you have like one foot in like the sleep world and like one foot awake. It's like when you're just starting to drift off at night and you're kind of like, am I asleep? Am I awake? It's like a little bit of both. And so we're bringing our students intentionally to that exact state where they're kind of like in that little dreamy, like, am I awake? Am I sleeping state? Because that's where we can do some really interesting deep work. And it's also deeply nourishing and supportive for like our nervous system, our physical body, and it helps us to sleep better. So really great for insomnia and things like that.
Mm.
However,
Yeah.
Adrienne, you've taken the training. Would you add anything? Because I know that you know a lot about yoga nidra.
Yeah, I fall asleep constantly in yoga nidra as well. So my challenge is to try to stay in the dreamlike state. But yeah, it's been really valuable for me as a new mom as well because I don't get much sleep and not as much as I would like. And having that sleep state energizes me so much more if I practice yoga nidra at night or in the morning for the rest of the day ahead. I am so much more energized than what I should be. So for me, it's been really powerful practice in this stage of my life. And there's so much sensory input going on as well when you have a little person in your world that is constantly on you. So I've been finding it a really beautiful practice to, yeah, just sort of go inward and have that time for me personally. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And I totally missed that too. But like it's phenomenal for overstimulation too. When you have that withdrawal of the senses, it's like you're just giving the senses and that whole sensory experience just like a break. And like our senses are constantly taking in so much information all the time. And so you're kind of giving them that break too.
Mm. And we talk about it a lot with the sleep, and it is the conscious sleep. But I think what gets overlooked a lot is all the other aspects that you could use it for potentially because you are connecting with Atman. So then you're planting that seed of intention, and it doesn't always have to be that you sleep well.
Yes. But sleep does make everything better too. So I always want to kind of like when, I tell people like it's okay if you don't want to meditate, like if that's not your thing. But I also tell when they're like, I keep falling asleep during yoga nidra. And I probably told you something similar. And I'm like, it's because you're tired. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's your body say like our bodies will always prioritize its basic needs of like, I need sleep over I'm going to take a conscious journey through the different layers of my being so I can come face to face with the true self. One is a need, the other is like a want. And so And because I hear this all the time in classes too, people are like, "Oh, I wanted to stay awake, but I kept falling asleep. What does that mean?" And it's like, it means your body needs more rest, and that's really important and valuable too.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'm not clear on entirely, and I'm
Yeah,
hoping you can clarify it for me. What are your thoughts on NSDR or non-sleep deep rest? So, is it
yeah.
just Yoga Nidra repackaged to fit the wider audience? That was
This is
Dr.
Yeah, I was
Huberman.
gonna say this is like a Huberman thing, right?
Yeah. Is it just like the body scan, do you know? Or is it missing the sort of spiritual aspects of it? Because I know it's designed based on Yoga Nidra to fit a wide audience who need it that are maybe resistant to the spiritual side of things. And there are a lot of people arguing that that's wrong and you shouldn't be doing that. But I can see the benefit of that because I know people that would really benefit from these types of practices. But as soon as they think there's anything potentially spiritual involved, they just like turn off, which that's a personal thing that I don't necessarily understand the view. But is it different? Is it actually just yoga nidra, or is it kind of a completely different practice in a way?
Yeah, so here's my 2 cents. I certainly don't wanna poo-poo Andrew Huberman. So my understanding is that the non and it stands for I mess it up sometimes. It's
Yeah.
non-sleep deep rest, right? And at non-sleep deep rest. So my understanding is that it absolutely is based on like the yoga nidra principles, like you said, pulls out some of the spirituality. But another piece, this isn't the only time this has happened. There's another one that's called iRest, like the letter I and then REST. That one is very similar, where it is, in my opinion, um, no facts here, just fun opinions. But in my opinion, that is repackaged yoga nidra that the VA uses. And I also work with the VA as well. I've worked with them like on some app development. And so I feel kind of comfortable saying this, but the iRest is where we get a lot of our research on how yoga nidra and similar practices are really supportive for PTSD. And I think about my great grandpa Kenny. He is 95 years old. He is a Navy vet. There is not a chance in, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast or not, but
You
you
can
know,
swear.
there is
It's
not a
fine.
chance in hell Grandpa Kenny, great grandpa Kenny, is coming to a yoga nidra practice. Conservative Navy vet, 95-year-old Grandpa Kenny, not a chance. He goes to the VA. So if he goes to the VA for his care and they're like, "Hey, here's this recording of this scientifically studied iRest," and I've learned a lot about iRest, seen their manuals, things like that. And it works with the same principle, this idea of like consciously putting the physical body to sleep so that we can do some work on a different level. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. If that means that great grandpa Kenny is going to get the support he needs in a way that feels comfortable to him, I'm absolutely okay with that. So this isn't the first time that yoga nidra has been reimagined, maybe with more of like the scientific side. And I agree with you. I see both sides because, the yoga nidra teacher in me and like the yoga nidra teacher trainer in me is like, but it's such an important part of the practice, and like, the lineage of like where it came from and all of this. And at the end of the day, what I care about most is that people are getting the support that they need. And they're only going to do that if it's in a space that they're comfortable with. And I think it's our job as teachers to meet our students where they're at and to support them with what they need, not to push our personal opinions and values onto them. It's our job as a teacher to support our students and put tools in their toolbox. So I see both sides. Going back to because the non sleep deep rest,
Rest.
NSDR, it my understanding is that it's kind of more of like an umbrella of practices where yoga nidra could fall under that umbrella, longer body scans could fall under that umbrella, and then certain like guided visualizations that would maybe fall more under the meditation aspect would fall under that umbrella. So my understanding is NSDR is kind of more of like an umbrella term for certain practices that get you to that state of like going somewhere deeper and getting into that. And it's really into like the brain waves, right? Like getting into like the theta brain, all of that. And so that's my understanding as to why it's different, is that yoga nidra would kind of fall under as like a NSDR practice, but it's not like the only one, versus like iRest is very similar, where it does take a lot of the physical components of how you do the certain steps. I still do like body, breath, opposing feelings, sensations, things like that, but they do take kind of more of the spiritual practice out of it. But like without practices like iRest, like I said, like 95-year-old great grandpa Kenny might not be getting all the support that he needs. And that's what I think is really important at the end of the day. But that's just my 2 cents.
I agree. I agree. I come from a very scientific family. Both my parents are scientists, and I'm sort of the black sheep that's interested in spirituality and yoga and things. And I can see the benefits, and I personally would rather something be packaged and people got the benefit from it. And then potentially maybe they might be open to some of the more spiritual sides of things as well if they're like, oh, I can see the benefit.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
you
I
kind of get
agree.
in through like the back door. You start with like what they're comfortable with, like you said, and then they're like, "Oh, I see benefit in that." And then they might be a little bit curious as to like, "Oh, I'm feeling good." Like, maybe there's something else that can make me feel even better. But just like when we took our own journeys becoming yoga teachers, we kind of took it at our own pace and at our own comfort level. Like my first yoga class, I didn't show up at a yoga class and be like, I'm here to learn about the chakras. I'm here to, journey through all of my koshas. I can't wait to be here and practice pratyahara, right? I showed up and I was like, I'm here for a good stretch. And that's where I started. And then it's like it does kind of, as your mind expands, as your comfort level expands, as you learn more, more kind of comes into it too. And so I think it's okay if our students, they don't need to be there yet. And they're on their own
All a
path and their own
journey.
journey. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I as a teenager, I used to practice Pilates because I was like, I don't need any of the spiritual stuff, even though I probably did at the most then. But that's interesting. So iRest still follows like a lot of the process because Yoga Nidra is quite a strict sort of process that you go
Yeah.
through.
iRest is very, very similar, and I've had people do both trainings. I've had people who have done iRest and then end up taking, like, a Yoga Nidra training, and so one of them brought, like, her training materials, and she was like, "I just think you're gonna find this so interesting," and it was very similar, and the students that I've had that have done both, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but a lot of the people that have done both, they start with iRest because they maybe already, like, work in the VA or they work in a more clinical setting, and so they start with that practice because that's like what they're utilizing. And then they kind of expand a little bit too, and then they're curious about the other side. But the feedback that I've gotten and from what I've seen in the manuals is they do follow a lot of the blueprint that is like full yoga nidra with some deviations, like with guided imagery and things like that. Also, it's more designed like specifically for like PTSD or like CPTSD. So there's like different considerations there, but a lot of it is similar to the blueprint in the same order as well. And so it was interesting to see that and then also hear the experience from both students. And they're like, this is really interesting because it's like I kind of learned about the science and all of that, but now I'm like really learning about like the other side of it. And that's really cool.
And the fun thing in the last few years, it keeps growing and growing, is that there's so much science backing a lot of these concepts that have been around for so, so long. And then you get people like my parents that go, oh, okay, there might be some validity in that.
Yeah. My husband is a doctor, and so we sometimes have, like, some spicy, like, dinner conversations where he's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, can you X-ray a chakra?" And I'm like, "Well, no, not yet, but maybe technology is there." It's just kinda funny when kinda have that
Yeah.
interse and I love for me and my teaching style is very much kind of finding that intersection between, like, sort of the more, like, intuitive of, like, what we feel and, like, intuitively know when we do these practices, and also, like, what does the data support, and then kind of finding, like, those 2 things and the
Mm.
intersection between the 2 of them. Because if we talk about these things, even like you and I, our students are thinking about it too. And we have students that are
Mhm.
curious about, they're like, well, but what does the data say? Or we have scientists or doctors coming to our classes being like, wait, but tell me more about like, the chakras or the koshas or things. And so I think it's just important conversations to have and to kind of know both sides.
Yeah, I agree. So, you've built your whole business effectively around meditation and yoga nidra, which is quite different from everyone that's focused on asana classes. You did talk about how you sort of found the niche and you followed your passions, and ADHD being your superpower. How did that help you with growing this business? Because you don't often think of ADHD and like meditation, I suppose, going together. How did that help? I'm pretty sure I'm a bit ADHD as well, to be honest. I haven't officially been diagnosed because I don't want to spend $1,000 to do it, and I'm not going to take the medication anyway. So I'm very interested in this part of how you've grown your business, your
Yeah.
ideas around that.
So I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was young, like in middle school or just before middle school. But it really is, in a way, kind of my superpower. One, it gives me a different perspective because you wouldn't think ADHD and meditation necessarily go hand in hand at first, but it's actually one of the most supportive things that you can do for a neurodivergent brain, but in particular, a neurodivergent brain that struggles with focus, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it's so beneficial. And so it not only gives me a different perspective as to like, how can I be a better teacher to help support my students that also have ADHD or other forms of neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is just kind of a umbrella term where there's something about your brain or the way that it works or the way that you learn that is maybe, a little bit divergent from the norm. But I have this theory. I have like 0% data to back this up. It's just an idea I have in my head. But I think that being like quote neurotypical, I think the more that we're learning, I think we're realizing that quote neurotypical is actually the minority. And the more that we learn about brains and the way that we learn, the way that we work, the way our brains take in information, that there's so many different variations. There's so many different ways that people can learn that like truly being like quote neurotypical, I think is actually maybe more of the minority. But that again, I have zero data to back that up. That's just my own personal theory. But it really
As an
does.
ecologist, I love that theory.
Okay, okay, cool. But it's kinda one of those things where it's like the more that you learn and it's like, oh, we all are wired a little bit differently. And like that's just a part of like the human experience, especially the brain. And there's so much we don't know about the brain yet. We know a lot, but there's still a lot we don't know. And so it not only helps me to become a better teacher because I have that perspective, it also, I think, is what really drew me towards kind of this style of meditation teaching, which isn't for everyone, but it's kind of a little bit more of like what I consider like a down to earth, like no fluff. So, like on my podcast, like all of the guided meditations are shorter. There's people where I've gotten feedback where people are like, why would you do a 5-minute meditation? The true benefit comes from more than 30 minutes, even though the science doesn't back that. Science says like even 8 minutes a day is enough. But even 5 minutes is better than no minutes. And that's also so much more realistic for people. And that can be really beneficial and really supportive for people. And so I think it's really helped me to kind of hone in on this sort of teaching style as well, because I've experienced it for myself personally. And I know there's a lot of people out there who want to meditate and they don't know where to start, or they want to meditate, but they want like a short one, or they, want to meditate, but they don't know what style to pick. And so then I love to have hyperfixations and be like, oh, you know what? I'll go live with the monks and learn twin meditation. So then I can come back and, give you the small bits of it, or, I'll go and take this course in training, but then come and take some elements of, pull in some mantra, or, pull in some of these elements and put them together to create these practices under a particular theme that can be really supportive for someone working on something specific. So I think it does give me a different perspective. But on the business side, one kind of byproduct of having ADHD for many is that we're a little bit impulsive. I also happen to be a neurodivergent Gemini. So, any of my astrologists out there, Geminis sometimes get a rap for being like a little reckless at times. But you kind of do the combo of the two. And it kind of gives me where I'm just like, yeah, let's give this a try and see what happens. And I think it kind of saves me from perfectionism at times where kind of my own curiosity propels me to try things and just put things out there. And I think there's just been a lot that had I not created it, like some of my most successful things, not that they necessarily felt like half baked in a way, but they're things that I think if I really struggled with like perfectionism, I never would have put it out because it never would have been quote like perfect, even though perfect doesn't exist. And just like putting things out there, even like yoga nidra teacher training, I launched it at the end of May and I didn't have a single video recorded like I don't know. I think I started recording on like May 10th. And I think I opened it up on like May 25th or something. And I also, when you're neurodivergent, you often need, well, I shouldn't say neurodivergent. My particular type of ADHD, you need a little pressure. Like I need a deadline. So if there's people signing up and enrolling, you better believe when I say that course is opening, it will be open and ready. But what I did was I rented an Airbnb and I did 14-hour days and I recorded all of that content, all the video content that you've seen in that training. I recorded over 2 marathon days. And it's like
Yeah.
20 some hours of content and then I did like 2 marathon days of just editing the videos and uploading them. And that is just how my particular brain works best. And so it doesn't always serve me well, but in some cases it does. And I think it's all about no matter what your brain does, the secret is really just learning how like you personally work best and then like leaning into that.
Mhm. That's good advice. Do you have any advice for ADHD teachers to help them grow with clarity and confidence and stick to some general path at least, rather than just continually going on side quests all the time and just not gaining that momentum that we kind of need? Like, at least you've done a lot of things, but you'll still manage to stick on like meditation sort of track.
Yes, the side quest. I absolutely fall victim to this often, both personally and professionally. The thing that really helps me is commit to something and keep a spreadsheet of data. So, again, your mom would love this, but something that you can measure. So, if you start a podcast, for example, tell yourself, I am committed to releasing one episode of this podcast for 6 months or whatever you decide you're going to. With podcasting, you should probably give it like a minimum of 6 months to a year. But whatever your project is, right? If you're a yoga teacher and you say, okay, I'm going to start this new class and I'm going to commit to growing this one particular class for the next 3 months. Whatever your metric is to measure that, keep it somewhere in a spreadsheet and every single week fill that in because often what happens because we have such great ideas all the time and our brains are going a million miles a minute is we're on to the next idea, this, that, this, that, this, that. But if you have an actual metric that you're tracking and then you can see, oh, this is kind of working, like slow and steady wins the race. Like the first month I had maybe 4 people, but now I'm noticing like consistently I'm getting like 8 to 10 people. And so having a metric is really helpful that you track. So commit to like one thing for long term. You can still do side quests if you want, but keep that one thing and track at least one metric on it. The other thing is create an idea parking lot. I have it in my notes app in my phone. And when you have these ideas, put them in your idea parking lot, like you're parking that idea for later. And then you keep them all so you don't forget. And then if you need a new idea, you can go back and pull from that. And I told this to a friend once, the idea parking lot, and she's like, well, that's genius because when you first have the idea, you think everything is like a Rolls Royce, but then when you like revisit it, you're like, oh, that's just a lemon of a car. That is not the Rolls Royce I thought it was when I first thought about it. So create some kind of an idea parking lot, whether it be in a notebook, Google Doc, Notes app, something like that is really helpful for all those ideas.
I love that ideas parking lot and having it in a specific place rather than just having I've got like notes everywhere,
Yeah, just like
probably
notes app in
scattered
your
to the
phone, and then it's
nines.
one big thing. And then sometimes you'll see
Yeah.
themes, and there's been times where I put together, like I put together like a guided meditations like mini course, and it was because like those different classes were like ideas that I had in that parking lot individually. But then I looked at it, I was like, oh, these are related. I'll just do a little series and put them together.
Nice, nice. All right. This brings us round to our rapid fire question time. So, what is one marketing strategy that has worked better than you expected it?
Doing guest teaching. So even like your summit and things like that, I think for me, because I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, so I'll try to keep it brief, but being like a teacher, getting in front of people and just like teaching, because it's so important you find a teacher that resonates with you. And so then it really helps people to right away they can tell like this lady is for me and this lady isn't for me. And that's perfectly fine. I know there's people probably listening being like, who the heck is this Kelly lady? Like, I don't want to learn from her. And that's perfectly fine. But I think just getting in front of people and guest teaching and letting people experience like what your style is, that's been really beneficial for me.
Awesome. And do you use AI in your business? It's 2025. If yes, how?
I do because I'm also dyslexic. And so I use it when I'm sending out like emails to catch typos because that's something, and I get so much feedback and I really, really struggle. It's because of my dyslexia where I'll read through and I'll try to proofread it. And yeah, and I miss a lot of typos. And one time I sent, I was trying to send out a breath exercise. This was before AI. And it was count to 4. And I forgot the O in count. And it was like big and bold. And so I like, just, just put CUNT in these huge letters in the top of my email. And I was like, dyslexia. Like, so I do use it sometimes as
Uh,
like a proofreader because I really struggle at times with that. And it's been really helpful. And then I also, sometimes when I'm brainstorming, like when I'm going to name a retreat or something, I'll have my own brainstorm list and then I'll put in like the retreat description and I'll just kind of challenge it to be like, this is the vibe of the retreat. This is it. Like, what ideas do you have? And it's interesting because I've never picked something that it's done, but it always kind of challenges me to like think of it like a little bit differently. So I would say those are the two things where I'm like, if I want to challenge my own brainstorming, and then I do at times have to use it as a proofreader because of my dyslexia. Yeah.
yeah. And finally, what is one piece of advice that you wish someone had given you before you started your podcasts? So you do have 2 podcasts as well.
Piece of advice before I started my podcast. I think, and this is like so I started my podcast almost 9 years ago. Its ninth birthday is next month. And at the time, the hardest thing was telling people, like, what is a podcast and how do you listen to it? And I think, like, the one piece of advice that would have been the most helpful is like, take it more seriously at the beginning. Like, I grew with it as it grew. So then as it grew, and then like advertisers would start approaching me being like, oh, what's your rate for running an ad? And then I'd kind of be like, I don't know. And I've done everything with that podcast, totally just flying by the seat of my pants. And I had no idea that when I was starting my podcast, I was actually starting it in like the golden age of podcasting, like when things were just like budding and like organic growth was just like right there for the taking. And I think if I could like go back in time, I'd give myself like a 1 page, maybe like double-sided 1 page, like cheat sheet of like, here's like the perfect, like, I didn't know what like SEO was 9 years ago. I didn't know about like keyword rich podcast title. I didn't know these things. I've learned them like over time and acquired them. But honestly, I think that would have been the most useful thing. And then the other piece that's, you know, maybe a little bit more like heart centered and intuitive, but is just like, don't give up on it. And I would say for podcasting, you need to give it a solid 2 years because I work with a lot of podcasters now too, like in a mentorship role. Like you need to give it a solid like 2 years. So you need to be committed to do something for not only for free, but usually losing money because you have to pay for like software and things like that. So you need to be willing to share something weekly or almost weekly at a loss for 2 years. And if you're like, this is not a topic that I would be willing to just talk into a microphone for, like -$50 a month for the next 2 years, really like think about that because it can be kind of a long game. But if you're like, yeah, I would like I do talk about this every single day, all the time, whether there's a microphone or not. But yeah, I think that's a piece too of advice is that it's just like, if I were starting a podcast today, for example, that's a piece of advice I would want.
Yeah, that's a good advice, and not just the -$50, the time. It takes
Yes.
you a lot more time in editing than what you probably think it's going to. It's
Mhm.
not, I mean, maybe some people you might just record it and go bang, but it's
No.
probably not gonna end up being the best quality. It's gonna take you a lot longer than what you
100
think it's going to.
100.
I just have one last question. What do you see that's working now for your students trying to grow their yoga or meditation businesses? What what do you recommend, like what's realistic for them to expect while growing their business?
I've been seeing and my students have been seeing a lot of success with events. So I talk a lot about this in Yoga Nidra teacher training because it's a great like monthly event to do, or like a meditation teacher training. Like I give even like the handouts for like an intro to meditation workshop and things like that. And there's been a lot of success in kind of having these either workshops or like full moon events or something like that, where it's kind of these specialty events where you're charging a little bit more. It's not always on the regular schedule. It's like a little bit more of an elevated experience. And this is something I teach too. Like I'll have like a little cheeky title of like how I make $400 per hour teaching meditation. But it's almost always because I did some kind of like a workshop and then it was really full and there's certain ways that you can fill. It's sometimes easier to fill a specialty class than just like a regular old like weekly class. So I've personally been finding a lot of success with that. And a lot of my students have been finding success with events virtually, yes, but also in person. I do think there's a component of us really craving kind of that community. So doing those like specialty events, collaborate with like sound healers or your local acupuncturist, think outside of the box, and like special kind of elevated experience events have been doing really well lately.
Awesome. That's a good tip. And that sounds fun to organize as well.
Yeah. And it's a little
Yeah.
more bang for
Thank
your buck too, because I think we're all kind of tired of like just hours in for like dollars out and having to teach like a bajillion studio classes. In my area, the going rate is kind of like $50 for a class. So if I were to make $400, I could teach 8 weekly classes. But we also know, like, again, the time and everything that goes into planning, getting there early, all of that, right? So it ends up probably being closer to like 12 to 15 hours of your time versus, I do a monthly, well, sometimes monthly, definitely at least quarterly event where I do yoga nidra and sound, and I might have 25 people come at $25 each. So yeah.
mm. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. It was so good to chat with you.